Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Ostler. My guest on today's podcast is my friend Lilly MacKenzie. Welcome to the podcast, Lilly.
Thank you, Richard, for having me.
Let me read you, listeners, by way of introduction, just an email I got from Lilly. And this will give you an idea of her story. Hi, I'm a transgender student at BYU. And then just offered to be on the podcast. I like these words from Lilly. I'm in a solid and secure position to do so while also focusing on other things going in my life. I'm an active member of the church. And I just thought that was really brave of Lilly to email me and offer to share her story, because I recognize we both do that there are other transgender people that are not in the good spot Lilly is. And I feel impressed that her story will help others and help all of us to better support transgender Latter-day Saints. A little bit of background on Lilly. She's grew up in Michigan for a few years, spent most of her time in California. She's a third-year student at BYU. Her pronouns are she, her. She's computer engineering. And she'll just share her story, and it's our joint prayer that this will just help all of us come together and better create Zion. I read a statistic recently that most Americans have never met or talked to a transgender person. And proximity is so important, and the few that have, it's usually just one. So I'm grateful for this platform and brave people like Lilly that are willing to share their story, because then inspiration comes to our mind on how we can better support transgender Latter-day Saints. Is that okay for an introduction, Lilly?
Yeah.
It's great. We'll just turn it over to you, and so grateful to have you on the show.
Okay. So yeah, as you said, my name's Lilly. I am kind of a bit nervous all of a sudden. It's like
okay.
The second I know the recording's on, I'm like, oh.
That's okay.
But yeah, so I'm a student at BYU right now, and it's gone pretty well. It's actually pretty amazing, my experience so far, which makes me feel kind of bad because I have friends who have not been having as good of an experience. And it's just the difference between which house or apartment you're in, which ward. You know, the Bishop Roulette, you've probably heard that a lot of times.
Yes.
But yeah, when I was first figuring things out, I listened to this podcast and another podcast a whole bunch, and it was kind of a way for me to kind of figure things out on the spiritual side of things, because there really isn't a whole lot more other than podcasts and some books. And my mom's even read the book that you published. Over the years, I've pieced together, oh, there's all this stuff I actually had in the past, because at first I thought, where did this come from? And then I was like, oh, kind of middle school when puberty started. But I had a whole lot of blocked out memories I had to kind of reclaim over time. And some details that did always kind of stick with me was when I was very little. It's kind of that typical thing of, oh, you remember a TV show or something. But thankfully it was kind of in a more positive light. Some of them were cartoons. They just, whenever something like Fairly Odd Parents or Codename Kids Next Door, those are some really, they're considered old shows now, but each of those had kind of a special or episode where they did kind of the gender swap thing with the main characters. And that always stuck with me from the time I first watched those. I could remember any random little detail from anything, but it was always a specific episode from a show, which just is oh, I remembered something, and because it kind of connected with me in some weird way. But that's not really kind of the impactful stuff, especially with playing with toys, because even when I was 6, I found an excuse to play with the My Little Pony toys that my family had by playing a game with my sisters. And growing up, I even had like a made up character that represented me that could just change into any character and then change into like the characters for those toys or something, which, yeah, I had that character from like second grade. It was very far back, but there's not really much else from about that time. It's just, oh, these handful of things that it's like, it could and it couldn't, because like, gender roles and all that are kind of whatever. And my parents don't really raise like with, oh, specific thing that you do and that you like. It's like I gravitated towards what I was interested in, but for some reason had my own little thing I developed where I was like, oh, I like this, but I see it as, oh, it's only for girls, so I shouldn't touch it. And it's not because of my parents and how they raised me. It's kind of my observation from people around me, like the kids I was trying to be friends with and stuff. And later on, kind of like some leadership, like when I was doing like scouts, because once we start moving into like sixth grade, when like puberty kind of started for me, that's when I kind of had everything slowly seep in on the side while I'm also trying to do everything else. And it first started where like in sixth grade, I started getting like self-conscious of kind of like my chest. So I would always wear a backpack with one strap because, and that's even something like I did all the way through middle school and beyond. And I have friends now that can recall that I did that so much and they always wondered why. Because yes, I was a bit chubbier back then, but I know it wasn't entirely because I was a bit chubbier, because it was specifically like, why does it feel like this? I need to hide because I'm supposed to have a flat chest is what I'm like expecting because of the people around me. And as I'm going through seventh and eighth grade, that's kind of where I start just regularly thinking, oh, what if everyone swapped gender? So I could be a girl that likes this girl I like, but actually instead she swapped to be a guy. That was one thing that I imagined regularly. And just a bunch of other small things. I've kind of done like the one thing is where you like kind of steal your siblings' clothes if you have sisters close enough in age to you to try them on in secret. Yeah, I've done that before. Uh, one of my sisters is probably going to be, well, she's not going to be upset now. It's been years since then. That was like sixth, seventh grade, but yeah, I kind of did that. So if you ever listen to this, sorry. uh, but the whole way through, of course, I never really was talking to anyone about it. I just kind of was silently, oh, there's this thing, and I know something's just not right, especially when I'm like trying to hang out with guys. Like I typically wanted to hang out more with girls. Like if it, like some friends of mine, if they said, no, we're talking about girl stuff, I'd want to be in the conversation more. I'm like, I don't want to be kept out because that or something. And that was kind of just like mixed into the hodgepodge of my middle school experience. And it does mean I did kind of also have like, I know there was definitely some dysphoria involved at that time too, because like I felt super bad about myself in a lot of ways, especially because some of the ways I eventually started learning about stuff, like the actual terms, is I myself decided to look up some stuff, not from someone saying, oh, you might be this. It's like I came across one thing and it was like a story about a little girl that had transitioned and like other actual people and their different experiences. And I was sharing that with all those kids as well. And they were all about my age as well, like feeling like, oh, this part of my body should not be there, and all those other things, trying to keep it like not too detailed because I'm talking about my body. But yeah. And what was the other thing? But yeah, the way I kind of figured things out is, well, I was basically in denial the whole time though, because I kept telling myself, oh, this is just this weird thing. This isn't me. And I feel, and that eventually led to like feeling kind of depressed and stuff, and not worthy of a bunch of things, because secretly I have this thing that clearly isn't normal. Because after the positive videos, I also had seen some of the negative stuff from groups that spout a lot of that kind of misinformation stuff, like PragerU. I ran into stuff from them, and that along with kids around me saying stuff, and even adults in church and scouts and youth saying some stuff like, I like one kid once talked to me about like gender spectrum stuff that Bill Nye had once talked about, and how that's some weird thing that isn't true, obviously. And it's clearly something that wouldn't have come from someone in 7th grade, but like parent had talked about it. It never came from my own home. Any of the stuff that made me feel it was this bad thing I shouldn't touch, it was always from other people in other spaces. And that was hard to communicate initially when I did start figuring things out later in high school to my parents, because at first I accidentally made it sound like it was them that had done something, but it never was. I just had kind of muddled stuff up. And as I spent time contemplating, I was able to clear that up. And cycling back to like 8th grade, after all this has been occurring, going into 9th grade, 8th grade-ish, I kind of hatched this idea, and the way I justified it to myself is I said, oh, I'm going to do this as a prank on this specific friend. And it was to transition. I actually like put in a whole bunch of thought. I'm like, I'm going to grow my hair out. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I want to do this. But I'm also going to just do it as a prank on this friend. That was my excuse to myself, was to pass it off as that. And I've even talked to that friend years later, and she laughed at it, because it's like, yeah, it was clear denial, because like trying to do that would have eventually led to, oh, no, it's not actually a prank. I would have eventually had to face myself and realize, oh, actually, it wasn't this the whole time. I fooled myself. But I kind of didn't end up following through on it, because I got to a certain point and started feeling bad. Well, I had started trying to grow my hair out, and I got to a really awkward phase, and I was heavily encouraged to cut my hair, and just that, and yeah, I needed to. It was really bad. But the way I was going about like that whole thing is, oh, the second I meet any small resistance, even if it's not actual resistance, it's just something that seems to get in the way, kind of like quote unquote, then I immediately kind of stopped. So the second I had to cut my hair, I was like, okay, no, I'm not going to do this. This would be a dumb thing. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm going to move on and forget about all of this. And then that kind of led to me. The only way I was able to forget about everything is I had to not only distance myself from people I was just starting to become friends with. But I also had to basically shut everything out, which means there were a lot of people I could have been friends with that back in high school and middle school that were LGBTQ that I didn't really get to even get to know properly until later in high school, kind of like in the middle of COVID. And I still regret that to this day because those people did not deserve me to ignore them. Like I would actually ignore people saying hi to me in the hallway or something. And so yeah, I kind of took that little kind of homophobic phase. I still feel bad about it because I think on like a bunch of things I did at that time, it wasn't like crazy stuff. It's just like, if the subject ever suddenly presented itself, I would react in an evasive way. Like I want to get away from it. Like I had an aversion to it. And it's because I was trying to completely forget about myself. And then one thing I do really love is aquatics. And I did that through high school, water polo and swim. And kind of getting super busy and focused on that and orchestra and symphony and all these other things kind of kept me busy for my first 2 years of high school once I started that phase. And then COVID kind of like slapped me in the face and was like, okay, nothing to do. And I did my best to keep myself distracted for a while, but eventually I started feeling super lonely and bored. And I ended up finding like a community online that consists of a lot of LGBTQ people, and some of them were members of the church as well. And I ended up making the decision, I want to try and be more Christ-like and be an ally and be friendly, because this is something that is important to understand clearly. Completely not remembering anything about myself though, because by this time I've blocked things out so much that I'm like convinced, oh, I know how it works. You don't become LGBTQ. You either are or are not. And I know I'm straight clearly because I had a crush on this one girl before. And that clearly did not end as me just being an ally. Because as I started listening and being more friendly to different people, I started relating, and I was like, okay, I kind of relate, but I know that I can't be that because I can't just become that. Like I had convinced myself that I was straight, but never thought anything of gender. And each time as I was working on being a quote unquote ally, anytime I did meet someone who was trans, I was kind of more distant when interacting with them because I was like, I relate too much. So, and I mean, well, the interesting thing is because you don't really have much of like, say, face or voice with like an online community on something like Discord, which has a whole lot of like social stuff, and there's like moderation and stuff to keep that all safe, but you do still have to be careful. One time, one friend accidentally referred to me with she, her pronouns for a little bit. And then they stopped and asked me privately, what you're a guy, right? And I just kind of paused and was like, yeah. And then they started using the same ones again. But from that that was when I first got like, I felt something, but I don't want to address it. I was still kind of scared of it, but it wasn't until I actually so this is like late 2020 about for me when this is all happening. And going into 2021, I got into using a social VR platform, which it's changed a lot since the last time I was on there. It's kind of more iffy than it was before, but at that time, it was like, oh, you could socialize with your friends from long distance, but from within your room, you just would wear the headset and you'd have an avatar. And that kind of led to me like getting to be like closer friends with people I was already kind of friends with. I ended up noticing, oh, I have a crush on this person, I think. And then immediately the floodgates of, oh, am I straight? Am I this? Am I that? That all, I started just questioning. It was like my brain hurt a lot that month, but I was also super scared because I also had become pretty familiar with the church policies on stuff, especially once that happened. And as I was starting to have this happen, a friend introduced me to this podcast and another, and I listened to so much of them, of the episodes. I've listened to probably at least 20 from yours alone. And it's like every single case I could find of someone that was trans or non-binary or something, because I was trying to get a feel, but that was a bit later afterwards. But the other stuff, that was kind of like an anchor, because I was like, oh, thank goodness there are members of the church other than just the few I know. And I eventually came to terms with like kind of being like kind of pansexual or bi. And I was like, oh, that should be settled then. But at the same time, being able to use like different avatars in a virtual world, I started noticing I enjoyed more feminine looking avatars. And then that led to me wondering, you know what, I should probably finally address the elephant in the room that I've been ignoring. And yeah, it was kind of, it was a mess during those first 2 months of that year. And then things got kind of rough because I was having that whole big struggle of questioning. My parents wondered if something was wrong because I seemed a bit off. And then one day they talked to me, and that's kind of like how I ended up kind of coming out to my parents. It was kind of like they asked stuff to do with it because they kind of figured it might have been that after like a couple conversations and the way I was talking in them. I was like, no, those people aren't like that. It's not a trend kind of thing. Because that's like a misconception you have if you don't understand. I had that misconception once too. And yeah, it wasn't the best. And we have way better ones afterwards, like discussions, and things are way better now compared to then, especially because that's when I was like just barely figuring things out. So I was like just super anxious and scared of any conversation because I had made myself think I was somehow convinced that my parents wouldn't accept me, even though time and time again, and even still today, the repeated phrase of "I will love you no matter what," unconditionally, comes from both my dad and my mom. It's just like the tough navigation with it involved with church stuff, and because it was kind of a surprise to them just because of like my behavior the years before, kind of. So it was like an out of left field surprise thing to them. That's what made it tough, because it was unexpected. And it was unexpected because I had gotten good enough at ignoring stuff about myself. So a lot of that year was really hard, though. And I once I did my best actually to avoid the label trans. I was like, no, I'm a non-binary, or no, I'm this thing that's kind of like that but different. So I used all these random like niche labels that only a handful of people really use to understand themselves. But then as the year went on, I kind of, along with help from some really close friends, I eventually got to the point in November of that year. I think it was November 2021 was when I finally came to terms and accepted myself as being trans. And the big thing that kind of kept pulling me away from accepting that was I was super scared about losing the temple. But because I know that the second I acknowledged that and everything, and knowing how things had already been going like dysphoria wise for me, and especially historically as well, that I wasn't going to be able to not transition. And since, just name, pronouns, and clothing presentation, that's what disqualifies currently in church policy from having a temple recommended. It doesn't even matter if I had started HRT for like my dysphoria, as long as I hadn't socially transitioned or any other type of transition method, then the church would have still let me have a recommend. And that was like that big ultimate thing I had to come to terms with, is I'm most likely not going to get that while I'm on earth, but I understand the plan of salvation and how I still have the opportunity to get that afterwards, and that the restoration is still ongoing. Because there are many things that I know, like for a fact, are yet to be revealed. And I'm certain of that, because if we've not received anything where God outrightly condemns something, then there must be something that we'll eventually get. Because if he hasn't already told us no, and it's left gray, and we need that clarity, then he could still at one point reveal something. And that's kind of what I have faith and hope in, is that is at some point in the future, but also that I know that I can still receive that. So one goal I kind of over the years arrived to is I want to strive to be as ready and worthy and able to make and keep the covenants for the endowment and the sealing. Like whenever I find someone I might get with, or like a partner and spouse further down the line, because I can't date anyone while I'm at BYU. That just generally doesn't work. But that was kind of a really big thing, because I prayed so much during that year, like, and they were big, long, conversational kinds, because I had just in like the year prior to that arrived to a way of praying that was the most spirit, I could tell it was a very good, strong way for me to pray, and that is making it like a conversation with Heavenly Father, but still opening and closing with the directed formality of "Dear Heavenly Father," and "In the name of Jesus Christ, Amen." And I never once felt that it would be wrong for me to transition, but it also felt like it was a choice of me going through and seeing how it felt. More like, I don't remember which general authority gave the talk, but it's the one where they drive down one road and it was the wrong way, and then they go the one that's the correct way. And it's you go down one road and you know if it's right or not. So you know which one is the correct one. And just with how everything's changed over time for me, like improved in a lot of different ways for my well-being and in some of the ways I understand things spiritually. It's transitioning has felt like the right decision, especially because that means I accepted a part of myself and was no longer trying to avoid this part of myself that I had for years kind of been blocking out and wait. And it was still hard for that last bit of high school though. That last year, that final year, my senior year. And this was after everything had gone back to in person, because I had no idea what would be a good name for me. Because I was like, I don't know what would fit. And I kept thinking about that, because that's kind of like a very hard thing. Because you're like, oh, now I kind of need to find a way to, like, literally by name identify better. Because while I still really like my birth name, it's not really gender neutral. So I kind of just need something that fits better. It's not I hate the name. I don't hate the name. It just doesn't fit anymore, but I'm going to keep it alongside me along the way. Like, probably kid I adopt in the future, probably I'll name that name. I'm keeping it a bit vague because I don't want to just say it. But I mean, the other interesting thing, of course, is after accepting that I was trans, I had to completely re-understand how I fall in love and am attracted to people again, because I had been blocking out a key part of myself in that. And it was like, oh wait, the way I'm attracted to guys is actually like the way like a girl is. At least when I've talked to friends that are cis women, they say, yeah, that's the same kind of way. Like shared feelings and emotions and experiences with like a crush on a guy. But also that it's still not like, oh, just like a guy or just like a girl. It's kind of like beautiful souls kind of a thing. I know that now that the way I do fall in love is more specific to my gender identity and being a woman. And that allowed me to, well, I didn't really get to do too much just before, but it allowed me to kind of explore things a bit better, because beforehand it was like only like thinking, not actually really dating anyone. Especially because I had to kind of just be ready for BYU, because at least the one thing I do know is it's very likely that I would end up dating and wanting to marry someone who was assigned male at birth, at least. Just anywhere kind of along that spectrum, because the only times I've ever had a crush on another girl, or yeah, another girl, it was kind of just like, oh, someone that I just want to cuddle, hold hands with and stuff. And just like one kind of just only like a certain, like not as deep of a connection. It's like I could fall in love, but it just wasn't the same. Something was missing. Like a deeper spiritual connection. It's hard to explain. It's just like I know what kind of works better, being a wife and being a mom. Because during high school, I would try and imagine, oh, what would the future be with like a spouse and everything? And I'm like, okay, house, oh, this many kids, and I guess a wife, and I don't know who that would be, but maybe. And then I would do whatever. I never really could think super heavily, but now it's like, oh, I know I want to have like a specific kind of career, but also be a mom and like better understand all these. These are like weird little things. I know I'm kind of rambling now, kind of gotta keep myself on track. Um, I think the biggest thing that came from that was hard was playing water sports in high school and then figuring out that you're trans and accepting that. And high school water sports, at least for the boys teams, you're wearing either like a jammer or a Speedo. So that just did not it didn't sit right for the last bit. But I did kind of still push through and actually did have a personal victory of I ended off high school and swim season putting in an official documented time for my best time for the 500 meter because I had gotten that just before COVID, but it wasn't in an official race, so it was never logged. And I got to end things off on my very final race with that logged. And that was the only real personal victory I had towards the end because graduation was a bit tough because that was just before they made the change to everyone having the same color robe. So the girls had one color robe and the boys had another color robe. But now they have all the same color. I kind of envy my a bunch of friends of mine that are younger because they didn't have to worry about the different color robes anymore. It's super weird, specific thing, but it's kind of funny how just random subtle things can really kind of get like both gender euphoria and dysphoria. So it was more so euphoria in me figuring things out because while I do have some dysphoria, especially about like facial hair and my voice and stuff, it's not super intense, especially ever since I started HRT because I didn't really get to that until November of 2023. And that was just for a whole bunch of different reasons of like money and stuff. But once I started that was like the extra that's when a whole lot of like brain fog and stuff finally kind of started going away. But now I'm just having to address the changes of how my ADHD works because apparently it does actually kind of intensify some symptoms of ADHD to have higher estrogen levels. So I'm having to relearn all of that. Yeah, the second I got out to BYU was when I started socially transitioning more openly though. Beforehand it was only with a few friends. Yeah, I'm starting to do things out of order. I'm sorry about that.
You're doing
And
great.
about anyone listening.
You're doing just fine.
Okay. Yeah, I know we got only a little bit left. Let's see what else. So I'm trying to make it just a summary up to now. School's been pretty good. I've only at BYU, I have met amazing people in every ward and dorm I've had to be in for like housing and church at BYU and even some classmates. My first year, that was both my bishop and friends I made in that ward. Because one rule BYU does have with housing is it still has to be your assigned gender at birth. So I have to room with a whole bunch of guys, which is not bad if they're good people, and it's been good people the whole time. But there is still a difference. Yeah, I've gotten along with every single set of roommates I've had. In fact, the first set I had, I didn't even really have to I didn't even end up kind of having like the formal, oh, I tell them all. at the beginning of the semester or something. Just one of them kind of just straight up asked me because he had been wondering and respected my pronouns and name and everything through the whole year and everything immediately, like, kind. I know it's like basic human decency to respect name and pronouns because that's just kind of the default that we do for everyone else, but it is a bit tougher when you're trans and it's Utah and it's BYU and it's church stuff. You worry based on what you've heard about other people's experience in the past, whether it'll go well. And it's thankfully gone well. And the biggest steps now is just, now that I'm on HRT, that will eventually make things a bit more tricky. But people so far have been pretty kind, but not everyone out here is as lucky as I've been. Kind of makes me wish everyone I know that's not had the luck, I want them all to just come live in the same apartment complex and be in the same ward in the same state, because I know that it's safe. Because it's been my experience so far in Provo First. So I guess, let's see, last couple things, because I know, okay. Biggest, most recent milestone has been I've officially kind of talked to the rest of my immediate family. So all my siblings now kind of know. This is kind of supposed to be a bit of a, oh, here's like the super in-depth summary if you ever were to listen to this in the future. But we're going to be talking more because it is a bit different when you have way younger siblings and you're the oldest of 5. Because it technically means that my little brother is the only boy. I kind of quote unquote switch teams on him. I'm sorry. Making a joke, but it's, yeah, you know. But yeah, that's kind of where things are now. Now I'm just kind of trying to save up money for the next school year and for housing and stuff. It's kind of a bit iffy this summer with a few things, but yeah, there's more to the future. I probably might come on another time later just because there's so much more I could talk about. Yeah, thank you for having me though. Sorry that it's been a bit of a mess of a summary of, oh, here's how I figured everything out, but I mean, it's kind of how it goes.
Lilly, you've done a great job. And on behalf of all our listeners, thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And listeners, I just wrote down some things as Lilly was talking. And one of the things I've learned after doing podcasts with trans, non-binary people is every story is a little different. And some stories are very dramatic where there's been long-term gender dysphoria with suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and others have been a different story. Your story seems less dramatic that way, but I want to make a point that it's still just as valid. And some people might say, well, this is just a phase, or you connected with trans people and you've heard all these stories. And listeners, I just invite us not to do that, to take Lilly's story at face value. I wrote down here, it costs me nothing to call you Lilly, just like your roommates. To me, there's, just acknowledge your gender identity. I think you mentioned you're a BYU student, so it's obviously you're out as trans at BYU. So, people, you've showed me your BYU ID card that has Lilly on it. So,
yeah, they do allow preferred name, and they allow you to do the picture. So
your BYU,
some stuff is hit or miss.
So, going to the temple has a little different bar, but the bar to fully be able to be a BYU student and get a degree, you can be a transgender Latter-day Saint and be a BYU student. I hope that's clear for everybody. And you're talking to your bishop and your stake president and BYU people and just following the rules that are present for you as you navigate this. And so I think that's, kind of a big takeaway from Lilly's story is if, you you can be a transgender Latter-day Saint and be a BYU student. So you can be a transgender Latter-day Saint and attend church like you're doing. You have a testimony to church. We talked about that beforehand. You've talked to me beforehand, and you did on the podcast about bishops and stake presidents. They're very supportive of you. And I want to read what's on the church's website. I'll put this in the show notes, but the church's website, there is a website about trans people, as Lilly probably knows. Here's what Elder Rasband says, one of our general authorities, one of our apostles. The feelings, trans people, quote, need to be encircled in the arms of their Savior and know they are loved. So often the Lord calls on us. He expects his welcoming, loving arms. So Elder Rasband didn't go down the road of trying to dismiss your experience or say this is a phase or Satan has confused you, Lilly, and you connected with someone on social media. All these stories you've heard, and I hate to bring these up because they could be triggering. So nowhere on the church's website does it do anything to dismiss the reality of transgender Latter-day Saints and how they feel. And so I invite us to let trans people inform us about trans people. Political ideology is another way to be informed about trans people. And there's a lot of political ideology out there that's very unkind to trans people. And I just encourage us to let Elder Rasband, people like Lilly, other trans people inform us about trans people, because then I think we just do better. One of the quotes I want to read is from a mom of a trans child. I don't believe Satan's work is to deceive people into being LGBTQ or trans. Instead, Satan takes these precious children of God like you, Lilly, and tells them they're worthless. He tells them there's no place for them in God's kingdom. Satan also resides in our fears, knowing that our fears will hinder our ability to love. His goal is to tear families apart and drive people away. He is succeeding, not because this group is deceived and are now gay or trans. He's succeeding because he's keeping us from coming together as the body of Christ and loving with pure Christ-like love. So I really love that. And then I think of the scripture in the New Testament, when you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, trans people are cast as the least of these. They're sort of, you've heard all these things, so I don't want to repeat them, but I think, from a doctrinal and ministering standpoint, I love to do everything I can to support my trans people. They're not the least of these. They're actually some of the most faithful Latter-day Saints, but what we've said about them and how we treat them can sometimes cast them as the least of these. So I just invite us to follow that charge in the New Testament, because that's the way we follow the Savior, is lift the stories and voices of those that are on the margins. And I don't think you're on the margins because God put you on the margins as a transgender Latter-day Saint. I just think we have less experience and know how to fully support you. Just some other podcasts we've done. I want to get Lilly talking again. As I started to do these podcasts is, I recognize that there's so many different stories here. One of the ones we did that came to mind as you were talking is David Smurthwaite, episode 254. If you want to Google Richard Ostler and David Smurthwaite, it'll come up, or you can episode 254. But he's biologically male, but he feels gender dysphoria. He's married to a woman, so his story's different than you, but he takes estrogen, and that's just what he needs to be able to sort of manage the long-term gender dysphoria that he felt. And it just helped me to understand HRT, hormone replacement therapy, that you've talked about, that is okay within the church handbook in some situations. And you can go to the church handbook and read that. It's public. And Lilly's probably a walking encyclopedia of expert of what the church teaches. But there's just so many stories in here. And so if you're trans, I think you've got to write your own story and figure out, there's social, there's legal, there's medical transition. What is going to be the best for you? And I'd probably do what Lilly's do, is try to take it slow. You've been on this road for quite a while, and just take it slow and figure out just what is the best way to write your story, and take God with you and talk to your church leaders you're doing, and stay close to Jesus Christ. And I think that will help you write your own story in the unique way that you're walking this road. So I'm just going to look through my notes here. I have a quote. I want to get Lilly talking. And sometimes I see a quote, listeners, on social media that I screenshot that I really like, and it just helps me want to do better. Inclusion isn't just inviting someone to sit at your table, it's believing they belong there. And that's by Mia Corella, a writer. And I just thought that to me is what Christ role modeled in his ministry. It wasn't just out of courtesy or tolerance that he invited Zacchaeus or some of the people that people said he shouldn't have at his table. I think he did it because he really loved them and felt like they belonged there. So to me, that's a sign of our discipleship. And I love your roommate. Sometimes allies can make all the difference in this space. And that roommate of yours that just, called you your preferred name, your preferred pronouns, and just didn't seem to bat an eye and was very consistent and was glad you were part of the apartment. And to me, that to me is Christ-like ministry and somebody who gets what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And that didn't cost him anything, but it meant everything for you. And you used the term safe place. And that's one of the greatest things that allies can do, or families, is to create a feeling that it's safe for Lilly to be Lilly and to be authentic in who she is and all the gifts she has to make this world a better place. We'll link in the show notes to the trans podcasts. We have so many podcasts, as you know, that we organize them on our website. So if you want to listen to more, if you're new to this space and this is the first time you've heard a story, we'll link to the show notes. And I think there's 30 or 40 different stories there. They're all different. And I've learned so much from my trans friends. I love your testimony of the temple, Lilly. Even though you can't go to the temple right now, just with, where you are and you're being authentic to who you are, but you're respectful of the temple. But I just recognize you have a testimony of the temple and you love the temple. And it's remarkable that you've tried to, balancing needing to be authentic and being honest with who you are and feeling the opposite of gender dysphoria, which you use the term gender euphoria. I feel that as a cis dude a lot, and so I know what it feels like, but for a trans person to feel what, you should feel. But you also love the temple. And so I just admire your faith and courage to navigate the complexities of your road. That's kind of all I put in my notes as Lilly was talking, but I just recognize the courage of Lilly you're all trailblazers, you're all pioneers, you're all very brave. And I don't think talking about trans people creates cis people turning trans. I just think it helps those that do have gender dysphoria to have vocabulary and have resources to make them feel better. My guess is there's been trans people throughout all of history, but we're just as maturing as society. We're getting better understanding. Sometimes I use the story of Catherine Schweitzer, who's not a trans woman. She's a cis woman, but in 1967, she signed up to run the Boston Marathon, and the assumption of the day is women were too frail to run marathons. So they ran after her and tried to pull off her number. And now we know, and she ran the marathon 50 years later. When I speak about this, I show both pictures, same number, 261. But what's changed from 1964? Well, we have proximity. Now, this is just a teacher principle. She's not trans. But what's changed? Well, we know women that run marathon. We have proximity, but I think God always knew Catherine Schweitzer could run a marathon in 1964. We just didn't have the science that I think will help us understand why you feel the way you do. And we didn't have proximity. So to me, that's an improvement in society as we're trying to create Zion. And Zion to me isn't sameness, listeners. It's not just, to me, it's diversity and unity, as other cooks talked about, as we can take all of us and our differences and all the beautiful things that God's created that are different, but we can be unified to lift the hands of those that hang down. And Lilly's part of that. So back to you. I don't know if there's anything I said that you want to, that's triggering to you in a negative way. You're welcome.
No, nothing triggering.
But sometimes
I kind of am.
You might have.
I'm kind of just aware of the different things that people can say, so I'm kind of just used to that. Oh, sorry if I cut you off, by the way.
No, just keep sharing any more of your story that came to mind, or any concluding remarks.
Yeah, just concluding remarks. I'm probably going to do I'll probably like sometime later on message you again, because I think I'm going to save talking more about the spiritual journey for a separate one, or else we'll be here for about the same amount of time, because I didn't quite go too in depth with some of it. I did kind of talk about a few things with you beforehand, but I kind of want to save talking about those for a more dedicated time, because I want to make sure it's like the way I explain it is understood for anyone listening, because if I try to sum it up, it might sound like I'm doing something a bit weird or wrong to some, even though I've talked about it with church leaders before, and they even are kind of on board with me doing that as a way to navigate my experience without being able to go into the temple.
It's great. You're really courageous. You're a pioneer. You're helping us create Zion. You're so brave to be out at BYU, to have all the conversations. This podcast gives hope to other people that are trying to figure out their gender identity. I did a great job of separating gender identity with sexual orientation. I kind of wasn't until people started to help me understand that I realized there's a difference there, as you're helping us better understand. So I'm just grateful, Lilly MacKenzie, for being on the podcast, your courage. We said a prayer beforehand that this would just be helpful for any of you that are feeling gender dysphoria, to have hope by listening to Lily's story, and anybody that just wants to be a better ally, to develop better vocabulary, better understanding, so you can say the right things and just do a better job of interacting. Because I think we do want to do the right things, but sometimes we just don't have proximity or have vocabulary or experiences, so we withdraw or we say the wrong thing. But this is all possible because of you, Lilly, and your courage to be authentic and real and share your story. And we'd love to have you come back on the podcast sometime in the future and tell more of your story.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mentioned it. I'm happy to do that another time.
So this is Richard Ostler and Lilly MacKenzie signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.